Based on phase 3 data that is barely published, most vaccine contenders have been given the green light approval. It is a testament to humanity in facing a global challenge of this nature, together both in developing a vaccine, but also delivering it to patients worldwide. There have been thousands of mutations around already from the original Wuhan COVID-19 RNA sequence that was first published. But the most recent UK announcement of the mutation N501Y, where one sole amino acid has changed at the 501st position of the spike protein and made it more contagious. So asparagine N at the 501st position has been converted to tyrosine Y. And we believe that's started back in September in Kent. This is important as the change has been on a receptor binding domain of the virus, which now latches on more efficiently onto the ACE2 receptor on a human cell. Therefore, it makes it far more transmissible. So the protective vaccine and the tyrant virus are now in a race against each other to get to the most vulnerable in society. It's inoculation versus infection. And the next few months are going to be a very telling time for the time period for the world.
To roll out new vaccines in a limited number of countries, and for which there's only currently limited manufacturing capacity, and for which global distribution seems a distant wish. How do we all, and GPs in particular, deal with vaccine skepticism? And do we as a society believe it's actually a duty to accept vaccination to protect others rather than just protect ourselves? These are just a few of the many questions which are likely to come up this evening.
Progress on the first, only the first of three hurdles. And I think as Sir Winston Churchill said, this is not the end, nor the beginning of the end, but possibly the end of the beginning. Because after we've proven that a vaccine is safe and efficacious at 2 months, we're still going to have to make between 10 and 16 billion doses of that vaccine, or those vaccines, and then we have to allocate them, distribute them logistically, administer the vaccine to 8 billion people around the world. And I think it's important to remember that vaccines don't save lives, vaccination does. It's very important now, not only to prove that a vaccine works, but then to make it in significant quantity. CEPI, the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations, believes that 2 to 4 billion doses of COVID vaccines could be manufactured annually. This means that our models are predicting that we won't have enough vaccine doses to vaccinate the 8 billion people on this planet until 2023 to 2024. Coronaviruses. So just a brief word on coronaviruses. So coronaviruses are promiscuous in that they can go into multiple animal species. I think COVID-19 is a great example of that. The mutation rate, again, is 8 to 10 times lower than it is for influenza. The 614G mutation, which actually swept through Europe, literally, in March and April and became the predominant strain, was very important. The UK Christmas strain, which has a different designation, it's called B.1.1.7. It has a very particular set of mutations, actually 14 to 16 of them, depending on how you're counting them. It has been spreading more rapidly since, it's been spreading since September, but particularly recently, 60% of infections in the London area have been that particular strain. Now, is it being driven by the strain or by social behaviors? And again, it's difficult to say at this point. It's something to be very concerned about. It's going to be important as we move on in the future, as we're rolling out vaccines, to continue very, very active surveillance for mutations and to determine quickly whether those mutant viruses, mutant COVID-19s, are susceptible to vaccine-induced immune responses. And again, at this point, we don't know anything about the Christmas strain that's spreading around the UK. The other part is that, COVID-19 is one of those coronaviruses that made the leap from bats into some other animal, maybe then into humans. We're going to need to look and make sure that we're not surprised by COVID-22 or COVID-24 in the future. And that means that we need to conduct worldwide surveillance, the same way we do for influenza. So again, to remind everyone, we already have 4 to 5 vaccines showing short-term efficacy and safety and should have more by January of 2021. But what more needs to be done? 16 billion doses of vaccine need to be manufactured. We need to distribute that vaccine so that it can get into 8 billion arms around the world. The other big questions, have we optimized the dose and schedule? Do we need boosts? What are the correlates of protection? When will we achieve herd immunity? Do we have adequate surveillance globally for mutations or new emerging coronaviruses? We very importantly need to follow up vaccinated volunteers for long-term safety, post-efficacy. We have to figure out what to do about opposition to vaccination. And there are a number of different groups, some of them anti-mask, some of them vaccine hesitancy, and they've combined in some cases. And how are licensure and emergency use going to affect our testing of future vaccines? I think it's important to recognize that a vaccine is just a weapon in a war against COVID-19. But in order to win this war, we're going to need a comprehensive strategy for prevention and also an army of vaccinators in order to get those vaccines into the arms of people who need them.
We are used to making things work. We are the super specialists of the NHS, and we do 90% of NHS consultations for 10% of the budget. So we're in the right place and we're the right people to do it. But we are chronically underinvested and have been for the last decade at least. That's leading to a serious shortage of GPs, particularly in the over 50s, very experienced GPs. We've got overstretched teams as a result. We're swamped with work. Playing devil's advocate, if you have practices that do not want to join the vaccination campaign, and we're already seeing some primary care networks opting out of vaccination campaigns on the back of the 15-minute allergy system, where you have to get someone waiting for 15 minutes after they've had their jab to make sure they don't have an allergic or an anaphylactic reactions. That has caused logistic problems for many practices, and some of them already decided to opt out. So if you have a practice that chooses not to be involved, or an area that chooses not to be involved at surgery level, what should be the criteria you should be looking for? Well, you'd have to have large public spaces for a start. You'd have to have little vaccination wastage, and already we're seeing that actually GPs are very good at not wasting the vaccine. Staff would obviously have to be in full PPEs. There'd have to be little mixing of people, because we need volume and we need throughput to get an effective vaccination day. And to get that, you need space. Non-GPs can give the vaccination, and I think that's important, because GPs are expensive pieces of kit. It should not necessarily be the GP giving the vaccine. Other people can be doing that while GPs are getting on with the really core, essential clinical work that has actually built up like a tsunami over the last 6 to 9 months, and which is going to spill over into 2021. We are going to be swamped with that work that has been building up and hidden from us in many cases this year. The other thing that hasn't been grasped, I think, in high power is the timescale, which is certainly currently unrealistic and has been politically driven, I suppose, and it's been on the back of optimism bias. Now, I can understand why this is the case. If you've had a year of unremitting gloom and doom, you're always looking to give optimism and to keep people going for that one last furlong. The problem with that, and we've heard this many times in recent days, is you overpromise and underachieve. And I think when the news came out about the Pfizer vaccine, it was an absolutely joyous day, absolutely fabulous. We were all filled to bits. The next day, I saw a patient who said to me, "Doc, oh, thank heavens that COVID's over." And that's some of the psychology that's out there. And we're still hearing people saying, well, January, February, maybe March, the sunlit uplands are there. Forget that. We should be saying it'll be summer at the earliest, and we're trying to aim for a semi-normal Christmas next year. You have to be honest with people. And finally, it's really important to make the vaccine easy for people to get the vaccine when it becomes available. And I'm going to take you back to Yale in 1965, and a study that was done then has been forgotten about, but it was a study that looked at students getting their shots for tetanus. And when that large cohort of students were told, you need a tetanus shot, and that was it, 3% of them turned up to get it. When they were told, you need your tetanus shot, Oh, and by the way, that's where you go, that's when it's open, and here's a map showing you how to get to there. Over 30% turned up. Psychology is absolutely vital here. Draconian central enforcement from on high by diktat and finger wagging will not work. It will misfire. We need agreement more than ever. And as Jerome says, we're in a war. And to win a war, you need to have your troops on board. And our troops for this vaccine are the public, and we need to bring them with us. They have to be following the generals, and the only best armies that follow generals are the ones that trust their generals. We've got a lot of work to do, but there is light at the end of the tunnel. At the moment, though, it seems a bit of a long way away.
If you look at the figures that Kantar, one of the leading polling organisations, produced from a survey in November this year, and then it was in June, and then again in November this year, they measured attitudes in the United Kingdom and other OECD economies. In November, 43% only of respondents in the UK said that they definitely would take a COVID vaccine when one became available. That was down from 50% in June. I happen to suspect that with the surging cases recently and the press stories about the new variant, that probably that figure will have gone up from 43% just in the last week or so. But the dissenting minority is significant, and the UK figure of 43% saying they definitely take the vaccine is higher than in most comparable countries. Italy 38%, Germany 35%, USA 30%, France 21% only, saying that they definitely would take a vaccine when it became available. Looking at the British situation again, 57% agreed with the statement that if UK national public authorities proposed a COVID-19 vaccine, then they could be confident it was not dangerous. 15% disagreed with that, and the rest was sort of didn't know enough or care enough to express a view. So you have 15% there who don't think that the NHS saying that something is safe necessarily counts with them. And it's worse if you ask them not about the authorities, but about the government. Do you trust your government to make the right decisions about a C-19 vaccine? Yes. UK, again, yes, 68%. No, 32%. Really striking and alarming dissenting minority there. Only just over a third of people believe that the risk from COVID-19 is so severe that it is acceptable to take fewer precautions than usual to approve and distribute a vaccine. There's a really big challenge there, where it seems to be politicians and scientists and medical practitioners need to work together, strip out some of the technical language and find a way that preserves accuracy, but also expresses reassurance and cites evidence in a way that people who are not scientifically, let alone medically literate, can understand easily and assimilate. I fear, let me put it this way, that the race to get vaccines to your country's populations could turn a lot nastier during 2021. All governments are going to be up against it. They have publics who are demanding the vaccines. They see that they are available now. And they're not going to think very kindly of governments, I think, that so we've got to wait our turn, we can do nothing about it. You see a bit of this in the European Union at the moment, where there's been some kickback in Germany that's happening now, because a decision was taken amongst the 27 that the vaccines would be distributed around every member state of the European Union, whereas Germany did have the wherewithal, the systems in place to have got there earlier, had they chosen to press ahead. And I think Jens Spahn is going to get have a bit of a fight on his hands over that. But in Britain, more than half of people in their 20s are living with their parents. the idea that young people in their 20s were going to be patient for months on end to see nobody except mum and dad and kiss nobody except mum and dad was always struck me as being fanciful in the extreme. There are certain things about human nature that are not going to change. And sometimes I think it's quite easy for those of us who are middle-aged, settled in life. We've probably got, most of us a reasonable sized place to live in that we're fairly happy with, perhaps a bit of outdoor space, perhaps in a settled relationship. Actually people in their teens, 20s, 30s are in a rather different situation there.
You have Ray Gelato here, who just I would like to bring in on this, because he's a well-known jazz player for whom all the changes that have been happening have been absolutely disastrous. And Ray, would you just like to tell us a bit about this?
Sure. Well, first and foremost, without going into too much, I found this whole thing fascinating and reaffirming my belief how serious it is, because we like to sometimes in our world, feel quite victimized by what's going on, because we've suffered quite a lot, all of us. But it's been more than tough. I mean, we've had thousands and thousands of pounds of work cancelled all year, and most of my work is abroad. Really, Spain and Italy is where I mostly work, apart from the UK. It's difficult to know what to say after hearing this, because it's an extremely serious thing, and it seems like a long road back, to really claw back what's going on. And that's not just for me, that's for theatres and all this. I mean, we were just about to do Ronnie Scott's starting last Friday, and that was cancelled, which I was very upset about. But then when they cancelled everything, it made me feel a little bit better. Didn't feel kind of the entertainment industry wasn't really singled out. It was a good reason for doing so.
Quick anecdote to follow that. At the weekend, I was talking to an extremely sensible young man in his early to mid-20s, after the Prime Minister had given his latest lockdown essential briefing. And I said, that feels, for the first time, that feels like it felt on the very first announcement in March. And he said, no, it didn't. And I said, why not? He said, because in March there was trust. And he said, that has gone. And you can't that horse is bolted, you cannot catch that horse now. And I think one of the reasons why someone like Nicola Sturgeon, irrespective of politics, has got a better personal profile in terms of competence than Boris Johnson is purely down to her day in, day out, being straight, being the only person at the lectern, no one else, telling it like it is. And you get people saying, well, she's doing her best. And to some extent, that's all you can really hope for, as David alluded to. If you've got the public saying, well, they're doing their best, they'll put up with an awful lot. What they won't put up with is over-promising and underachieving.
And this has been a fantastic webinar, it really has, but the very last thing I'd like to do is to ask, in fact, this is a letter from a question from Lynn Russell, and this is a question I'd like to put to each of the panelists, which is, how and when do you honestly see our world getting back to how it was before COVID? Let's start with Jerome. Jerome.
Okay, actually, can I just quickly on what Roger and Sir David have been saying? The WHO actually had looked into the problem around vaccine hesitancy and access, so enabling access to care and generating social supports for this are really going to be key to and leading with science are really going to be key to putting things in place. So when will we be out of this? I think that 2021 will be an important year if we can get enough vaccine out and if we can convince people that at least in the beginning, they're going to need to continue to protect themselves and others by using masks and distancing and avoiding crowds. I would guess that the end of 2021 to 2022 are probably going to be in higher income countries where significant rollout of vaccine will occur. Other places could be longer.
Roger?
Depends what you mean by out of it. In terms of people going about their daily business, feeling relatively normal, I suspect 18 to 24 months. But the trouble is, COVID is going to continue to circulate around the globe pretty much forever, and it's going to continue mutating. COVID is going to become part of our daily lives. It will rise and it will fall. We're going to have probably further outbreaks across the globe, even once we've dampened this one down. So we will learn to live with it. But COVID is now a word we are always going to be using.